Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Today we're going to build an English server. You know, a long, narrow table with a couple drawers that you would use as a buffet in a dining room. Now first we'll take you to our favorite antique shop in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where we found an antique. And then we'll come back here and build our version of the English server.
The new Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
I can never walk by this store without taking a peek. European country antiques. Looks like ladders are the special of the day. Look at this one, kind of crude and rough. And here, a lidded bench, a bit like the croquet bench that I built, except this is meant to be used indoors. Now the owner, Ed Stewart, likes to bring in things with the original finish if he can, like this ladder. And look at this work table. Has the original paint, just worn away at the corners. Looks great. Now in the window, he has a pine hutch on this side, and over on the other side, looks like a French piece with paneled doors. And look at this, a wooden bird cage. Hi, Ed.
Hey, Norm. How's it going?
Good to see you.
So watch your step, we're a little crowded.
Well, that's good. Let me tell you what I'm looking for today. I'm looking for a table, not too wide, not too long, that I can put behind a sofa or in a hallway. Not going to eat at it. Okay. Maybe just put a couple lamps or some books on it.
All right, so a sofa table.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the English and French call them servers, usually used in a dining room. This is a pretty French piece. Nice turned legs, nice and wormy.
Nice wormwood. Ah, but no dovetails on the drawers.
Yeah, these are new drawers. They were added in. Give it a little extra storage.
Okay, well, I'll keep that in mind.
Okay, the next one right next to it. It's English.
Oh, now what's going on with this? This seems to be very narrow. It's only about 16 inches deep, and the legs are kind of beefy.
Nicely turned, though.
Yeah. Oh, now this one's dovetailed, but put a few nails in there to tighten it up a bit.
There. And right below, if you've got the room, is a nice long one. Almost 7 feet long, 3 drawers.
Now these poles seem a little modern for this piece.
Yeah, you know, those are the original ones. They've just been cleaned up and polished. You can see there's no hole in the back.
No hole on the inside.
Indicate a different one.
Now the base seems to be pine, but this top looks like a hardwood, like beech, and it's a single width board.
Nice big board.
Great piece, but I think it's a little bit too big.
Yeah, you have to have the room
for
this one.
Okay.
Right behind you, I was just waxing up this French one. Just came in.
Okay, this is nice tapered legs. Has a little bead on the rails.
Yeah, a little
breadboard edge.
Nice drawer. Provided.
Well, I'll keep that in mind. But you know, when you get these pieces, are they painted?
No, usually, like in this case, this is a stained piece that has a hand-rubbed paste wax on it, which is what I was putting on now.
Is this the maintenance schedule?
You know, they tell you to put it on with a cloth, but I use a brush. The wax lasts a lot longer. Just brush it on. Very simple. Let it sit for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then come back and just buff it with anything 100% cotton. Works well.
Ah, okay. That's a good tip.
Yep.
Now, where do all these pieces come from?
Well, this shipment just came in. English, French, Irish, a few Spanish pieces around.
So you go over, tour around, and then ship a container back?
Yeah, I ship back a 40-foot container. I go over about 6 times a year.
We have some great stuff.
This is the other one I wanted to show you. Let me just move this out of your way.
Oh, okay. Now this is getting closer to what I would like.
Yeah, this is an English piece.
Pine top. Has the splines in the top. That's something we haven't done. Simple legs. Boy, it looks like there must have been a dog in the house.
Yeah.
This is really chewed up. And look at this front. It's all one piece. They actually carved out an opening for the drawer. Nice wooden handles.
Yeah, nice drawers.
Yeah, I like that. Oh my, is that the price?
Well, it's on inventory, never know.
An English server. Doesn't that conjure up images of a buffet laid out in a fine dining room of an English mansion? I don't think that's where this was. I think it was in a pantry somewhere. And the more I look at it, the more repairs I see. Look at this runner, made out of 3 pieces, just nailed together. This one is too thick. It sticks down below the back rail. These 2 appear to be originals, but I still can't get over the repairs on the legs. This lap joint to extend this leg, and on this side, a little patch at the top, another lap joint with a couple screws to hold the repair in place, and this looks as old as the leg. But these pine pieces are great, especially with a few coats of wax on them. If you'd like to build the English server, a measure drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. Now, we went out and tried to find some real old pine to build this piece, and let me show you what we found. You want character? Check this out. Full of wormholes. But if you look at it along the edge, it's got a bow in it like a hockey stick. I don't think I can get very long pieces out of that. And if you look at the back, it's very dry. This is dry rot. So we'll save this for some other antique piece we might try to reproduce. We did find some better stock for our project, these floorboards. These are unfinished floorboards. They're naturally worn down from wear and tear on them. You can even see some spatters of paint, and they're great for projects like this. Before I can work with these boards, the first thing I like to do is check them for any bits of iron or metal. So I use my metal detector. And please don't send us any emails about where to get this. Check our website or go to a security supply house. You can find them there. Okay, there we go. One bit there. Oh yeah, look at this. 2 little tabs from a staple, so we want to get rid of those. Take them over to our bench. Get a little pair of pliers. We should be able to pop those right out of there. Just dig down it. Pull them out. These little bits of metal will destroy the planer or the joiner. There we go. Let's check it again. All right. Now another thing that will damage your planer or your joiner is any grit that happens to be in these boards. So I found it a good practice to take a belt sander with some 60 grit paper and just sand it down. But before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. The board that I'm working on is going to be for the top of our server, and if you look at the side that I'm going to show, it has a cup in it, and I want to remove that. I could try to belt sand it off, that would take a while, but since I have an 8-inch joiner and this is an 8-inch board, a couple passes through it will clean it up. So now to the surface plater. With this surface nice and flat, I can put it down on the table and run it through for the thickness I want. Let's look at the antique original again. The top is made up of 2 wide boards and 1 narrow board. There's a spline at each joint that runs end to end that sits in a groove. And that spline is meant to make the boards move together. Today we would use biscuits. I like the idea of the separate boards showing up, but I don't like the size of this gap. So maybe on the top we could hand plane the edges at the joints to give it some of that detail. But before we do that, I have to straighten the edges so they'll butt up against one another evenly all along the length. For that, I'll use the joiner. I got an email the other day on joiner techniques, so let's review them. When I set this board on a perfectly flat table, you can see that it comes along and then it goes up, which means there's a bow in it. If I push down on this edge as I start it into the joiner, it's just going to follow the bow. So what I do is come back to about the midpoint of the length of the board, put pressure down and up against the fence, and just guide the piece through. Now I don't change the position of my hands to the outfeed side of the table until the board is almost all the way through. It usually takes a couple passes to straighten the edge. Now I'm starting to cut the slots for some number 20 biscuits. And I'm setting them lower than the center because I want room to round over this edge and not see the biscuit. Okay, now I'm just using a small block plane to sort of round over that edge. And I'm not running one end to the other. I want this to look very random, so I'm hitting it at different angles. And every once in a while, we'll give it an extra lick so that it looks like maybe somebody took a ice pick or something to dig some suet out of the groove. Okay, after a few minutes working with the block plane on each edge, this is the result we have. Now, it's not nearly as distressed as the antique original, but we're getting there. Now it's time to glue it up. All right, I've rolled some glue on the edges. I've put glue in the biscuit slots. Put it all together, clamp it, and set it aside. Now I'm beginning to form some mortises in these square blanks, which are going to be the tapered legs. The tenons from the rails will fit into these mortises. I'm using a 3/8" chisel in my mortising machine. We like this dedicated mortiser because it's good at what it does. You could set up a mortising attachment on a drill press, but that takes time, and once it's set up as a mortiser, you can't use it as a drill press, and vice versa. So we really think this is the best tool. The next step is to taper the legs, and for that I'm going to use my tapering jig, a couple pieces of plywood with a hinge at one end and an arm on the other end with plenty of adjustment. The way I set up the taper is to take my blank onto which I've laid out the taper. Here's where it starts, here's where it ends. I slide the jig tightly up against the fence, bring the blank so that it's just on the edge of this miter slot. Here you can see that the beginning point is about 1/8 inch inside the slot. So now down the other end, I can bring it in until it's about 1/8 inch inside the slot again, lock it in place. Now to set the fence, I make sure the blank is tightly up against the stop, slide the whole assembly over to the beginning point of the taper and just bring it shy of the blade. I'm going to leave a little extra material to plane off later. One of the reasons that I like to mortise the legs first is so that I get the tapers on the right sides. The taper is always on the mortise side of the leg. Now let's run them through the joiner. Let's look at the antique original again. This front rail is made from one piece into which the draw openings were cut. Now it appears that the draw fronts were made from a different piece of material. It would be nice if all the grain matched throughout the piece. So what I've done is set up a board that we can get the fronts and the rail from. I've laid out the opening for the draw front, and I'm going to make the cut with this little saw. It's called a trim saw. The blade that's in it is a plywood cutting blade. It has very fine teeth and a very narrow kerf. Now what I'm going to do is just set the saw with the table all the way down and then plunge the piece in along the line. I'm not going to use a straight edge. If it's a little bit off, I don't care. I'm going to round the edges. I want it to look old. Okay, now for the cross cut, I'm just going to use the same procedure. Plunge the saw down, and then I'll finish it off with my jigsaw. Okay, that takes care of one. One to go. Now let's look at the antique. On each end there is a short rail. The short rail is attached to the legs, and the front rail is attached to the leg with a tenon that fits into that mortise I made earlier. To make the tenons, I'm going to use the table saw. One advantage of this particular rip fence is that I can pull it back and use it as a stop block to guide the area of the cut. If I tried to run a narrow piece through with the fence in its full position, I risk kickback. Now the fence is set for about 3/16 inch height, and I'll make a pass on each face. Now I'm going to crank the blade up to 1/2 inch, and that will be the setup I need to make a shoulder cut on each edge for the top and bottom of the tenon. Here at my bandsaw, I've set up a straight edge clamp so that it's 1/2 inch away from the saw blade. That way I can remove the material at the top and the bottom of each tenon. To complete the tenons, I'm going to turn to my tenoning attachment. It's an inexpensive accessory that's indispensable here in the workshop. It has lots of adjustment features, but most importantly, it holds the piece of wood securely as I run it through the saw, and it keeps my hands far away from the blade. On the antique original, the method of supporting the draws and attaching the top was a little bit crude, so I'm going to try to improve on that. I'm going to run 2 dados in the long rails at the top and bottom of the draw openings. They will receive some plywood strips which will not only support the draw, but will also keep it from tipping out as it's opened. I'll run one dado in the short rails, and that'll be at the top edge to pick up these corner blocks, which I'll use to keep it square and to attach the top. So I've set up the dado for 3/4 of an inch width, and I'll just run the pieces through. Well, before I actually assemble the base for our table, I want to distress it some more. So I'm using this microplane, and it's great. It shaves away a lot of material quickly. So where there's a defect like where a nail was right here in the old stock, I'll really remove the material, not trying to make it symmetrical. Then I'll come along with a sander and just smooth everything out. It's taking us longer to distress this piece than it took us to build it. But after all, you can't rush the aging process. Now, I don't want to forget to do around the edge of this drawer opening. I want it to look like it's already been opened several thousand times. Finally, we're ready for a little assembly. Some glue on our tenons and glue in the mortises. We'll slip the pieces together and clamp them up. Okay, now I can take this long assembly and drop it onto the short pieces, which I've already attached to the back, and then we'll clamp that up. Now, the original didn't have these corner blocks, but what they're going to do is help make the piece more rigid, and they're going to give me a place to attach the top. A little bit of glue and a couple brads will hold them in place. Now, the drawers are going to be supported by these plywood pieces, which go into the dados that I made earlier, and I secure them in place with a couple brads. Now, these pieces will guide the sides of the drawer. These upper guides will keep the drawer from tipping when it's extended. Okay, well, that does it for today. Tomorrow we'll attach the top, make some drawers, and then spend some time in the finishing room. This is a good project. Well, good morning. I got here early today, removed the clamps from the base, and made one of the drawers. Now, the drawer front is the piece that I cut out of the rail earlier. I milled up some 5/8 inch thick pine and dovetailed the joint from the front to the side, and just a dado joint in the back with a plywood bottom. Now, I started by taking the 4 pieces, the front and the side and back, and put a 1/4 inch groove along the bottom edge for that plywood bottom. Here I've widened my dado to 5/8 of an inch, and that allows me to make a groove in the side pieces to receive the back. Now I'm turning to my dovetailing jig to make the dovetails for the drawer. Now, these jigs come in all different forms. Some are fixed in their layout, they're different lengths. Some are adjustable, like this one. I can do up to 24 inches in width of dovetailing. Today, I'm only interested in this section down here. I've adjusted these fingers so that I'll end up with 3 dovetails on the side pieces. Now, the advantage of the adjustable fingers is that I'll get a half pin at the top and bottom of the drawer front. With the fixed setups, I can get a half pin at the bottom, but it's hit or miss at the top edge. Now I just take my router, which is equipped with a dovetailing bit and a collar, and run it around those guide fingers. Now I'll set up to do the other side. The next thing is to cut the pins in the drawer front. So the first thing that I do is take a piece of plywood and mount it where I had the side and clamp that in place. Now I'm going to remove the piece of plywood that was the sacrificial strip when I cut the tails, take the drawer front, and mount that in place. Now I'm going to flip the guide fingers over to put them in the pin mode and lock them down at the thickness of the piece. Now I'm going to take a piece of scrap, which is the same thickness as the drawer front, Drop it in there and loosen the jig so that the fingers are tightly down on the blank. Okay, now I'm ready to route the pins. Okay, let's see how we did. Okay, it fits pretty good. Now with this old pine, it's not uncommon to get some little chips in the tails. That's okay. All right, with some glue on all the mating surfaces of the tails and in the sockets next to the pins, you just slide it together. And with all that glue surface area, you can be sure that this is not going to come apart. Now I just slide the bottom in, no glue, that's going to float, and I'll attach the back. Okay, let's see how it fits. Yeah, pretty good, a little fine tuning, and we'll sand the front edges. It'll be great. Let's start working on the top again. Now if you look again at the original, all these wonderful Dutchmen and filled holes add character to the piece, and I'm trying to bring some of that to our project. So over here on the top, I've put a long Dutchman to cover up 3 nail holes. I do that using a template of any shape I want and a router with this little collar, and I just remove the bad material to start. Okay, now that's all cleaned out, so I can remove my template, which is just held in place with some double stick tape, and then attach it to this scrap piece of wood out of which I'll cut the patch. Now all I have to do to adjust my router is remove the outer collar, just pops off, and then I run this small collar around the edge of the template. Now you can buy this accessory for your router. It's called an inlay kit. The next step is to remove the patch from the blank, and I'll just run that through my table saw. All right, now I just have to sand the corners, and then I'll glue it in place. Okay, I just tap it in place. And then we'll sand it smooth. The next step is to fill in some of these nail holes. Something we normally don't recommend until after the finish has been applied, but in this case, I really want these to show. This is a 2-part filler, has a hardener and a base, and you just lay it in here, it'll dry fairly quickly, and then we'll grind it down so that it's smooth. And it'll dry lightly, so they're going to show, and that's what I want. We've used a variety of methods in trying to finish this old pine over the years. We've made our own stain, we've stained the piece first and then put polyurethane on, but this product seems to work the best. It's a combination stain polyurethane. I'll put on 3 coats with a light sanding between each coat. That'll give the piece plenty of protection, and it really brings out the beauty of this pine. After this has had a chance to dry thoroughly, I'll give it several coats of a good quality furniture wax. This is a good project, and it doesn't belong in a pantry.